They said time heals all wounds, but nothing prepared her for this moment. Years ago, she walked out on him, mocking his empty wallet, laughing at his broken dreams, leaving him for a man with money. She swore he would never amount to anything. But tonight, fate flipped the script. Desperate, humiliated, and bankrupt, she walked nervously into a grand boardroom, only to freeze when her eyes landed on the man at the head of the table. It was him, the husband she abandoned for being poor. Now he was the CEO of the company she was begging to work for. And when he finally opened his mouth to reply, his words shattered her pride and made her cry. The rain tapped lightly against the window as Ethan sat at the dining table. Bills spread in a messy pile before him. His last paycheck, already half gone, sat like a silent insult on top of the stack. He rubbed his temples, trying to summon courage, but the sound of high heels clicking across the wooden floor snapped his thoughts in half. Laura, his wife, stood in the doorway, suitcase by her side, her lips pressed in a line that was anything but kind. "You're late again," Ethan said, voice calm, though he knew what was coming. She laughed bitterly. "Late? Ethan, I don't even know what I'm late for anymore. Late to live? Late to breathe in a house suffocating with dreams that pay nothing?" He straightened, trying not to let the words sink in. "I'm working. I'll figure it out. The job's gone, yes, but I have plans, real ones. I just need plans." Laura cut him off, her voice sharp, echoing against the walls. "You've had plans since the day I met you. Sketchbooks full of scribbles, late nights talking about ideas, inventions. Do you know what I married? Not a man, a dreamer, a man with no money, no future, no power." Ethan's hand clenched around the notebook lying beside the bills. That notebook, its pages filled with rough diagrams and notes, was all he had left of hope. He wanted to tell her to look closer, that those pages might someday change everything. Instead, he swallowed the words, his silence heavier than steel. Laura dragged her suitcase across the floor, the wheels scratching the wood. From outside came a low hum, the sound of an engine. She smirked. "Marcus is waiting. At least he understands that a woman like me deserves more than empty promises." Ethan looked at her then, his eyes searching for the woman he once loved. "Laura, everything I'm doing for us." She shook her head slowly, pity disguised as contempt. "There is no us, Ethan, not anymore. I need a man who can give me the life I deserve. And you'll never be more than a poor dreamer." The words sliced through him, but he did not break. Instead, he forced himself to stand, his frame straight though exhaustion pressed down on his shoulders. He watched as she walked toward the door, her perfume lingering like a ghost in the room. As Laura stepped outside, neighbors peered from their porches, whispering, "Did you hear? She's leaving him. Can't blame her. He's got nothing left." Their murmurs carried across the street, salt poured into Ethan's wounds. Marcus leaned against his sleek car, the shine of the polished hood mocking Ethan's poverty. He wrapped an arm around Laura's waist, pulling her close, and kissed her cheek with the confidence of a man who had already won. She laughed, open, cruel, free, like someone who had just shed a dead weight. Ethan stood at the doorway, rain dripping onto his bare feet. The glow of Marcus's taillights blurred in the rain as the car pulled away. For a moment, his body felt hollow, his chest aching as if a vital organ had been ripped away. He wanted to scream, to run after them, to demand she see the man he could become. But instead, he looked down at the notebook still in his hand, its edges worn, its pages damp from the drizzle that had crept inside. He whispered almost to himself, almost to the world, "One day." The word hung in the night air, unheard by the neighbors who had already retreated into their homes, unheard by the woman who once promised forever, unheard by the man who now thought he had taken everything. But those two words carried something more powerful than Laura's contempt or Marcus's wealth. They carried a seed. As Ethan stepped back inside, lightning flashed through the window, illuminating the battered notebook. His thumb brushed across a sketch, an idea he had once pitched and been laughed at for. A faint smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not joy, not triumph, but a strange, quiet fire. Outside, the laughter of Laura and Marcus faded into the distance. Inside, Ethan's silence deepened into resolve. His heart might have been cracked, but his will sharpened into something unbreakable. The rain grew heavier, drowning out the last echoes of betrayal, but inside the small, dimly lit house, something unseen had shifted. Ethan didn't know how, or when, or what it would take, but he knew this much. The man she left tonight would not be the man she met again. And when that day came, when the world turned and their paths crossed once more, she would see. She would remember these words. She would understand what it meant when he whispered into the storm. One day. The night after Laura left stretched into weeks, and weeks blurred into months. Ethan's house grew quieter, emptier. The laughter that once filled its rooms was gone, replaced by silence and the constant rustle of overdue notices slid under the door. His refrigerator hummed like a ghost in the kitchen, half empty, the little food inside carefully rationed. Every morning Ethan rose before the sun, pulled on a uniform that smelled faintly of bleach, and walked to a nearby office building where he worked as a janitor. His job was simple: mop floors, empty trash, polish glass walls until they gleamed. The same people who once smiled politely when he spoke about his ideas now walked past him without a glance, treating him like he was invisible. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they shook their heads and whispered. Yet even in those quiet humiliations, Ethan found a rhythm. He cleaned with one hand, but in his other hand, tucked away in a pocket or balanced on a cart, was that same battered notebook, pages worn thin, ink smudged. He would jot down sketches between mopping floors, scribble formulas in the back stairwell, and refine his ideas in the lunchroom while others gossiped about promotions and pay raises. One night when the building had emptied, Ethan lingered in the lobby. He set his mop aside, crouched near the light of a vending machine, and traced lines on a page with a borrowed pen. His eyes glowed as if the world around him didn't matter, as if the fluorescent buzz and smell of disinfectant were fuel for his imagination. A voice startled him. "Young man," it said, warm and frail but clear. Ethan looked up. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who owned part of the building, stood with a cane in her hand. She had silver hair neatly tied back, and her eyes studied him not with pity, but with curiosity. "You're still here?" she asked. Ethan quickly closed the notebook. "Yes, ma'am. Just finishing my shift." She tilted her head, her cane tapping softly on the tiles. "I've watched you for weeks, always scribbling in that book, like you're chasing ghosts. What is it?" His instinct was to hide, to shrug it off. But something in her tone, the absence of mockery, made him pause. Slowly he opened the notebook, turning it toward her. Pages filled with diagrams, app wireframes, and business plans stared back at her. "I know it looks like nothing," Ethan said, his voice low, "but this is what I believe could change things. For people like me, for everyone." Mrs. Patterson adjusted her glasses, scanning his work. For a moment, her wrinkled brow softened, and she smiled faintly. "My late husband was like you. Everyone called him foolish for chasing ideas. Then one of his inventions fed our family for 30 years. She touched the page with a gentle hand. "Don't let them tell you you're nothing. But tell me, what do you need?" Ethan exhaled slowly, his heart caught in his throat. "I need time. I need someone to believe in me. Just once." The old woman studied him for a long moment before she nodded. "Meet me tomorrow at noon. Bring this notebook. I'll listen." That night, Ethan walked home under the streetlights, notebook pressed to his chest. For the first time since Laura left, hope flickered. It was small, fragile, but real. Days later, Laura returned, not to him, but to the same building. She walked past him without hesitation, her heels clicking like victory drums. She looked stunning, dressed in a fitted black gown, her arm linked with Marcus's. They were there for a charity event in one of the upper floors. She spotted Ethan near the elevators, mop in hand, uniform stained with bleach. She paused only long enough to smirk. "Still chasing fantasies, Ethan?" He said nothing. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly, a quiet fire in his eyes that unsettled her more than any angry retort could have. Laura frowned, tugged Marcus's arm, and they walked away laughing. As the elevator doors closed, Ethan looked down at the notebook in his pocket. He didn't need to answer her. He would let the future speak for him. That night, as he scrubbed the marble floor until it reflected his tired face back at him, Ethan whispered under his breath, "One day." And this time, he wasn't just promising himself. He was daring the world to doubt him. The office lights buzzed overhead as Ethan stood nervously in front of a panel of investors. His shirt was pressed, though frayed at the cuffs, and his tie felt like a noose around his throat. He clicked the remote, and a shaky projection filled the screen behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice careful, "this isn't just an app. It's a platform that connects ordinary workers with opportunities they'd never see otherwise, a tool to bridge the gap between skill and demand. Imagine another failed startup," one investor interrupted, arms crossed. The others chuckled politely, the kind of laugh that carried no kindness. Ethan's heart sank, but he pressed on. "I know what it's like to be invisible, to be underestimated. This platform—" "Thank you, Mr. Cole," the lead investor cut in, standing to signal the meeting was over. "We'll pass." The rejection landed like a hammer. Ethan closed his laptop slowly, gathering the printed pages of his pitch while their murmurs trailed behind him. Too idealistic, no traction. He's just a janitor trying to play businessman. By the time he stepped outside, the sunlight felt cruel. He sat on a bench, notebook clutched in his lap, the sting of humiliation pressing into his bones. Around him, the city buzzed with life, horns honking, businessmen shouting into phones, lovers laughing on corners. He was invisible to them all. That night, back in his cramped room above the laundromat, he stared at the ceiling, wondering if Laura had been right. Maybe he was only a dreamer. Maybe the world didn't need his ideas. He turned to his notebook, running his thumb over its edges. It was all he had left: ink, paper, and stubbornness. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Ethan's phone buzzed with a notification. It wasn't a bill or a rejection email. It was a message from a blogger named Tech Horizons. They had stumbled across a copy of his prototype demo online and written a short piece titled, "The Janitor with a Vision, Could This App Change Everything?" At first, Ethan thought it was a prank, but when he clicked the link, there it was, a glowing review. The blogger called his idea bold, raw, and refreshingly human. They wrote, "He may not have investors yet, but Ethan Cole is building for the people who need it most." And that's where real innovation begins. His hands trembled as he read the comments beneath the article. A few mocked him, sure, but others leaned in with curiosity. "I'd use this app. This guy's onto something. Does he have a GoFundMe?" For the first time in months, Ethan felt air rush into his lungs. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't invisible. Someone out there saw him, not as a janitor, not as a failure, but as a builder. That night, he worked until dawn. Fueled by ramen noodles and the hum of his old laptop, he refined his code, improved the interface, and uploaded updates to a small corner of the web. His fingers flew over the keyboard with urgency, as though each keystroke was proof that he wasn't done yet. Meanwhile, across town, Laura and Marcus dined in a chandelier-lit hall, their glasses clinking with champagne. She wore diamonds on her wrist, her laughter echoing off marble walls. "My ex?" she scoffed to a circle of friends. "Probably still polishing floors. Some men dream, but real men earn." The table roared with laughter. Marcus smirked, sliding a hand across Laura's back, but his eyes darted elsewhere, to a younger woman in red, laughing at another table. Laura didn't notice, too busy basking in the glow of her own ridicule. But in a cramped apartment with peeling paint, Ethan's world had shifted. His screen blinked with a notification, a direct message from an angel investor who had read the blog. It was short, almost careless. "I like your idea. Let's talk." Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhausted but alive. The rejection still burned, but alongside it was a new ember, faint but undeniable. For the first time since Laura walked out, the future didn't feel like an endless night. He whispered to himself, almost smiling, "One day." And this time it didn't sound like a dream. It sounded like a promise. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon rolls, but Ethan could barely taste the air. His hands shook as he opened the email again on his cracked phone screen. "I like your idea. Let's talk." The message was short, almost dismissive, but it carried more weight than any insult he'd heard in the past year. He read it again, just to be sure it was real. 2 days later, he sat across from the sender, a young angel investor named Clara. She was brisk, sharp-eyed, the type who spoke in bullet points. "Your concept is raw," she said, tapping her tablet, "but it's human. That's rare. I'll give you 50,000 to get a working beta out." Ethan blinked. 50,000? Clara smirked. "Don't look so shocked. You need 10 times that. But I invest in potential, not perfection. Use this to prove me right." He shook her hand with a grip steadier than he felt, his voice low but certain. "You won't regret this." That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He pored over his notebook, his laptop, the endless scraps of code and design sketches. With Clara's money, he could finally hire 2 developers he trusted from his old neighborhood. They worked out of a rented basement office, wires hanging from the ceiling, paint peeling off the walls. They brought sleeping bags and ate cold sandwiches, but they built. Every milestone felt like a small victory. First, the app ran without crashing. Then it matched workers to small jobs. Then people started talking about it in forums. "It's not perfect," users wrote, "but it helps." Word spread. Within 3 months, there were 10,000 users. By 6 months, 100,000. At a year, they crossed 1 million. Ethan hardly noticed the exhaustion. He still wore the same jacket, still rode the same bus, still carried the same notebook, but inside something monumental had shifted. He was no longer invisible. Meanwhile, in the glittering towers across town, Laura's world sparkled but trembled at its edges. She clung to Marcus's arm at dinners, laughing too loudly at jokes she didn't understand, wearing gowns she couldn't afford without his help. One night at a fundraiser, she leaned close to Marcus and whispered, "Did you hear? Ethan's name is in the news again. Some app." Marcus raised an eyebrow, smirking. "The janitor turned genius? Please. These things flare and die. Don't tell me you're watching him." Laura forced a laugh. "Of course not. He's nothing." But when Marcus excused himself, Laura followed him with her eyes. She saw him in the corner, whispering into another woman's ear, his hand grazing her back with the same casual charm he once used on Laura. Something twisted in her chest, but she buried it under diamonds and denial. Back in the basement office, Ethan taped a faded photo of his father above his desk. "Build something the world cannot ignore," his father had once said. Every time Ethan's eyes rose from his screen, those words glared back at him. He taped a second photo beside it, Mrs. Patterson, smiling faintly the day she signed over her share of his company to him. "Control it yourself," she had told him. "You're the kind who doesn't sell out." When the app hit 1 million users, journalists arrived. They called him the janitor visionary, the man who built an empire from a mop. Ethan disliked the headlines, but he couldn't deny the power of the story. One reporter asked him, "What kept you going when everyone doubted you?" Ethan smiled faintly, glancing at the notebook in his hands. "Because I never doubted myself." The article went viral. Investors began knocking. The same men who once laughed him out of rooms now begged for meetings. Ethan was polite, but distant. He remembered their faces, and quietly, almost without fanfare, he purchased the very building he once scrubbed clean. The marble lobby gleamed the way it always had, but now his name was etched on the brass plaque by the door. Employees filed in, carrying laptops instead of mops, greeting him with nods of respect. One evening, as he walked through that same lobby, a janitor paused, staring at him with wide eyes. Ethan stopped, smiled, and said softly, "You won't need that mop forever. Trust me." The man looked confused, but Ethan kept walking, his reflection tall in the glass doors. Across town, Laura stared at a headline splashed across a glossy magazine. "Ethan Cole's app tops 1 million users." Her glass of wine trembled in her hand. Marcus noticed and chuckled. "Don't tell me you regret leaving him." She forced a laugh, but her throat was dry. "Of course not." But when Marcus turned away, her smile collapsed. For the first time, she wondered if she had thrown away more than she realized. And far away, in his office with the old broom leaning quietly in the corner, Ethan whispered the words that had carried him through the storm. One day. That day had arrived. The headquarters buzzed like a hive. Rows of young engineers tapped furiously at keyboards, their screens glowing with charts, code, and live user data. Ethan walked the aisles slowly, not like a boss inspecting employees, but like a craftsman watching his creation take form. His quiet presence carried weight. People lowered their voices when he passed, not out of fear, but out of respect. In his office, the walls were simple but meaningful. A framed photo of his father, a sepia-toned picture of Mrs. Patterson, her faint smile eternal. And in the corner, leaning silently against the wall, the old broom he once pushed through these very halls. It had been months since the app crossed 1 million users. Now it was 5 million, with projections soaring higher every week. Investors begged for meetings. Tech magazines called him the People's CEO. Journalists wanted his life story. Ethan declined most interviews, preferring the work to speak louder than his face. But one interview he couldn't refuse. A leading business network filmed him in his office, the broom visible in the background. "Why keep that here?" the reporter asked, gesturing to it. Ethan's eyes flickered toward it, his face calm. "Because I never want to forget where I started." "Every empire has a foundation. That was mine." The clip went viral, reaching millions. Comments poured in. "That's humility. This man's different. No wonder his company is booming." Across town, in a dim apartment far from the life she once flaunted, Laura scrolled through the interview on her phone. She almost dropped the device. Ethan looked sharper, older, stronger. His suit tailored, his hair perfectly kept, his voice steady. The same man she once dismissed as a dreamer now sat at the helm of an empire. She shut the video quickly, but the sound of his words echoed. "Every empire has a foundation. That was mine." Marcus had been gone for weeks by then, his betrayal delivered like a knife in the dark. Bank accounts drained, jewelry pawned, luxury cars repossessed. Laura was left with debts, whispers of disgrace, and the chilling knowledge that the man she left behind was now the man everyone admired. Still, pride is a stubborn thing. When a friend mentioned Ethan at a dinner she could barely afford to attend, Laura laughed too loudly. "Ethan? Oh, please. These tech bubbles burst overnight. He's lucky, for now." But men like him, they never last. But her voice cracked slightly, and those who listened raised eyebrows. Even Laura heard the weakness in her own words. Meanwhile, Ethan prepared for his next move. Not a show of wealth, but a gesture of permanence. Quietly, through a holding company, he purchased the marble-floored building where he had once scrubbed toilets and mopped floors. He stood in the lobby the morning the brass plaque was unveiled, his name engraved across it. Coal Industries. For a long moment, he said nothing. The same janitorial staff he once worked alongside stood nearby, clapping hesitantly. Ethan turned to them and said, "This building isn't just mine. It's proof. Proof that none of us are trapped where we start. Remember that." The janitors nodded, some smiling shyly, others misty-eyed. For Ethan, it wasn't about proving Laura wrong anymore. It was about proving his father right, proving Mrs. Patterson right, proving himself right. That evening, alone in his office, he sat by the window, city lights flickering like stars beneath him. He reached for the framed letter Mrs. Patterson had left him before she passed. Her handwriting was careful, shaky but clear. "Do not waste your gift. Build something that outlives you. And never trade your dignity for anyone's approval." He read it 3 times, then set it gently back on the desk. In the silence, he whispered again, "One day." But this time, the words weren't for himself. They were for every doubter, every whisperer, every person who once looked down at him. And across town, Laura stared at a stack of unpaid bills. The glow of Ethan's face still burned into her mind from the video clip. She clenched her fists, tears of rage and regret in her eyes. For the first time, she thought of calling him, not to apologize, but to survive. Laura's world began to unravel slowly, then all at once. At first, it was small things. Marcus came home late, his cologne sharper, his shirt sleeves smelling faintly of another woman's perfume. His excuses were slick, rehearsed. Business dinner. Traffic. You're imagining things. But one morning, Laura awoke to silence. Marcus's side of the bed was empty. His closet, once packed with tailored suits, stood bare. The jewelry box she kept on her dresser was empty too. When she scrambled for her phone to call him, the number was disconnected. Panic clawed at her throat. She ran to the study, fumbling with the lockbox where they kept shared documents. The papers were gone, bank accounts drained, credit cards frozen. Marcus had vanished, and with him every safety net she thought she had secured by leaving Ethan. For days she told herself it was a mistake. Maybe Marcus was on a trip. Maybe he'd come back with an explanation. But then came the whispers, neighbors smirking, friends avoiding her calls, gossip swirling. She left her husband for Marcus, and Marcus left her with nothing. Laura found herself selling pieces of her past just to survive. The diamond bracelet Marcus once clasped on her wrist at a gala was pawned for rent money. Dresses she once wore to charity events now hung in secondhand shops. The life she had traded love for was collapsing like a house of cards in the wind. Each night she scrolled through her phone, searching for scraps of stability. And always Ethan's name surfaced. Interviews, articles, features on financial shows. Headlines blared, Coal Industries expands globally. From janitor to CEO, the Ethan Cole story. The same man she had left in the rain, calling him a dreamer, was now the face of innovation. The world adored him, and she was invisible. One evening, desperate for distraction, Laura met with an old friend in a cafe. The woman scrolled through her phone and stopped on a post. Did you see this? Ethan Cole's hiring again. Hundreds of jobs, high-paying too. His company's unstoppable. Laura's stomach twisted. She leaned closer. Hiring? What kind of jobs? Her friend shrugged. All kinds. He's building a second headquarters. Some people say he wants to help people who've been overlooked. Isn't that something? Laura's laugh was brittle. Overlooked? Ethan was always dramatic. He loves attention. But her friend didn't reply. She only gave Laura a pitying look, the kind that sliced deeper than cruelty. That night in her small, dim apartment, Laura sat at the kitchen table with a resume in front of her. Her hands trembled as she wrote her name across the top. She had once mocked Ethan for scribbling in notebooks. Now she was scribbling on cheap paper, praying for a chance to survive. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered to herself, how did it come to this? And then, almost as if answering her, the glow of her phone lit up with Ethan's face on a news headline. Coal Industries, building the future. His eyes looked straight into the camera. Calm, cold, certain. For the first time, Laura felt a sting sharper than betrayal or loss. It was shame. She pressed her pen harder against the paper, writing the words she thought she'd never write. Application for employment. Her pride screamed, but desperation drowned it out. The next morning, dressed in a simple blouse and skirt she once would have sneered at, Laura clutched the resume like it was a lifeline. She walked toward the tall glass building that bore Ethan's name across its entrance. The brass plaque gleamed in the sun, mocking her, reminding her of the night she left him behind. She paused outside the revolving doors, her heart hammering, her throat dry. For a moment she considered turning back, but the faces of unpaid bills, empty accounts, and Marcus's smirk haunted her. So she walked inside. The receptionist barely glanced up as Laura slid her resume across the desk. Name? Laura hesitated, then whispered, Laura Cole. The receptionist's eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe contempt. But she typed it into the system and handed Laura a visitor's badge. Take the elevator, 22nd floor. Wait outside the boardroom. Laura clutched the badge, her hands clammy. She didn't notice that upstairs Ethan was in his office, reviewing applications. When her name appeared on the screen, his pen froze mid-signature. For a long time he stared at it. A bitter smile tugged at his lips, and with a calmness that chilled the air, he whispered to himself, one day. That day had come. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Laura stepped out, clutching her resume so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her heels clicked against the polished floor of the 22nd level. But her confidence faltered with each step. The corridor was quiet, lined with glass walls that gave glimpses into bustling offices. She could see employees in sharp suits, bent over laptops, engaged in serious conversations. It was a world she once believed belonged to her, only through Marcus, never through Ethan. A receptionist guided her toward a set of tall oak doors at the end of the hallway. "Wait here," she said curtly, before disappearing. Laura smoothed her skirt, adjusted her blouse, tried to hold herself as the woman she used to be, the one who turned heads at galas, who had men lining up to impress her. But her reflection in the glass wall betrayed her. Her hair, though styled, no longer shone with the expensive treatments she once took for granted. The blouse, though clean, was not designer. The diamond necklace she once wore was gone, sold to pay rent. She swallowed, forcing herself to stand straighter. "He doesn't know I'm here," she thought. "He won't be in this room. CEOs don't handle interviews. I'll talk to some HR manager, I'll get the job, and that will be enough." Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere shifted the moment she entered. The table stretched long, polished to a mirror shine. At its head, Ethan sat silently, a pen in hand, papers neatly stacked before him. He was dressed in a navy suit that fit like it was made for him, his posture straight, his gaze unreadable. Laura froze in the doorway. For a heartbeat, she couldn't breathe. The air seemed to vanish from the room as her eyes locked onto his. The man she had left behind, the man she once mocked as a dreamer, sat in the seat of power she had never imagined he could reach. Her lips parted, but no words came. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. His pen hovered above the paper. His eyes fixed on her with a calm that cut deeper than any outburst ever could. Around the table, executives shifted, whispering quietly to one another. They knew her name. They knew her history. Some smirked. Others simply watched. Laura forced herself forward, her legs trembling. She placed her resume on the table, sliding it toward him with shaking hands. I'm here to apply for a position," she whispered, her voice thinner than she intended. Ethan lowered his eyes, scanning the paper briefly, though he didn't need to. He already knew every line of her story, the glittering rise with Marcus, the sudden fall, the debts, the desperation. He knew because he had followed her silence, the same way she once followed his humiliation. She tried to steady herself. "I know the past. I know I made mistakes. But I'm willing to work hard. I'll start anywhere. I just need a chance." For a moment, silence drowned the room. The tick of the wall clock grew deafening. Laura's pulse hammered in her ears. She searched Ethan's face for something, pity, anger, forgiveness, but found only stillness. Flashbacks seared across her mind. The night she walked out of their home, rain dripping from the porch, neighbors whispering, Marcus's arm around her waist. She could still hear her own voice, cold and cruel. "You'll never be more than a poor dreamer." Now sitting across from him, she saw the irony with brutal clarity. The dreamer had become the builder. The poor man had become the powerful one. And she, the woman who had chosen wealth over love, was begging for crumbs at his table. Ethan leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together, his eyes never leaving hers. His silence stretched so long it felt like punishment. Employees exchanged glances, curious, almost thrilled at the unfolding scene. Finally he spoke, his voice low, deliberate. "Why should I hire you, Laura?" The question sliced her like glass. Her mouth opened, but no ready answer came. Pride and shame wrestled in her chest, her throat dry. She tried to speak, but her words broke before they left her lips. The silence after his question became unbearable. Laura's shoulders sagged as tears pricked her eyes. She clasped her hands together, lowering her voice to a desperate whisper. "Because I have nothing left." Laura's voice trembled as it echoed across the boardroom. "Because I have nothing left." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the silence that followed. Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall, but the cracks in her voice betrayed her. Around the table, Ethan's executives exchanged discreet glances. Some looked away politely, Others leaned forward with quiet curiosity, but no one dared interrupt. Everyone sensed this was no ordinary job interview. It was something deeper, rawer, almost cinematic. Ethan remained still, his hands folded, his eyes steady on her. His calmness was unnerving, almost cruel in its quietness. He could have shouted. He could have laughed. He could have thrown her words from the past back in her face, but he didn't. Instead, he simply let her words echo until they suffocated her. Laura shifted uncomfortably, her shoulders collapsing as she tried again. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know what I said, what I did, but I can change. I'll work harder than anyone here. Her words faltered as her gaze fell on the broom, leaning in the corner of the boardroom. The very broom Ethan once pushed through the halls of this building. It stood there like a ghost, a reminder of what she had mocked, what she had spat upon. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Flashbacks surged unbidden. The night she had left him in the rain, suitcase in hand. Her laughter as Marcus wrapped an arm around her waist. Her words, sharp, venomous, unforgettable. You'll never be more than a poor dreamer. And now here she was, begging for scraps from that same dreamer. Tears finally broke free, streaking down her face as she whispered, Ethan, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Please, give me this chance. The room stilled, the tension so sharp it could be cut with a knife. Employees leaned in slightly, their faces a mix of pity and grim fascination. They had seen Ethan the visionary, Ethan the CEO, Ethan the builder. But now they were witnessing Ethan the man confronting the ghost of his past. Ethan leaned back slowly, his chair creaking softly. His eyes didn't soften, didn't waver. In his silence, Laura felt something colder than anger, indifference. When he no longer looked at her as the woman who had once been his everything, he looked at her as if she were just another applicant. Flashbacks rippled through Ethan's mind, overlapping with the present. Mrs. Patterson's frail voice. Build something that outlives you. His father's firm words. The world will laugh until you give them no choice but to clap. His own whisper into the storm that night. One day. That day had come. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice calm but edged with steel. I built this company on a principle. I hire builders, people who believe when no one else does, people who sacrifice, who stand, who fight even when the world laughs at them. Laura's tears blurred her vision as she waited, desperate for the sentence that might save her. Ethan's voice sharpened, every word deliberate. I don't hire people who tear others down. I don't hire people who run when times get hard. And I don't hire people who spit on dreams until they need one to survive. The words struck her harder than any insult Marcus had ever delivered. This wasn't rage. This was justice. Her sobs broke free, echoing in the boardroom. Pride dissolved into raw humiliation. She reached across the table as if her trembling hands could bridge the years between them. Please, Ethan, I have nowhere else to go. Please. But Ethan didn't flinch. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket with calm precision. His executives followed his lead, standing as well. Silent witnesses to a moment that felt larger than life. Ethan picked up the resume she had handed him. For a moment, it looked as if he might reconsider. But then, without a word, he set it gently back on the table. Untouched, unwanted. His final words were quiet, almost merciful, but they carried the weight of thunder. Laura, you made your choice. Now live with it. And with that, he turned and walked out of the boardroom, leaving her collapsed in her chair, her sobs echoing off the glass walls. Employees lingered in stunned silence. Some pitied her. Others nodded with quiet approval. But all of them knew they had just witnessed the moment where the past had been avenged, not with fury, but with dignity. Laura pressed her face into her hands, trembling, broken. She had once mocked Ethan as a man with nothing. Now she was the one with nothing, and his reply had made her cry. Not just tears of regret, but tears of recognition. She had destroyed her own destiny, and the door closed behind Ethan with a finality that told her she would never get it back. The boardroom was so quiet that even the ticking clock on the wall seemed loud. Laura's sobs filled the silence, raw and broken, each breath shuddering out of her like shards of glass. She had begged, pleaded, stripped herself of every last shred of pride, and still Ethan had walked away from her resume as though it were nothing more than a scrap of paper. She lifted her tear-streaked face to him, desperate, clinging to one last thread of hope. "Ethan, I can change, I swear. Please, don't do this to me. Don't shut me out." But Ethan stood unmoved, his eyes sharp, his shoulders squared, his presence towering, though he hadn't raised his voice once. His calmness was more terrifying than anger, more final than rage. "You shut yourself out, Laura," he said, his tone steady as steel. "The day you walked away from me in the rain, you made your choice. You thought money was worth more than loyalty. You thought dreams were worthless, and now you stand here begging me to believe in you?" His words sliced through her, each one a blade. She shook her head violently, her hair falling loose around her face. "I didn't know." "You knew," Ethan interrupted, his voice cutting like a whip. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You didn't want a husband. You wanted a provider. And when the money ran out, so did you." The executives around the table shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at the floor, others at Laura, their faces pale. A few exchanged glances of grim approval. They weren't just watching a CEO. They were witnessing judgment, a reckoning years in the making. Laura's knees weakened. She dropped into the chair nearest to her, clutching its edge like a lifeline. The polished table reflected her face back at her. Tear-streaked, broken, unrecognizable. Ethan moved toward the broom in the corner of the room, the old, battered broom that had once been his burden and now stood as his trophy. He picked it up slowly, holding it in one hand. "This," he said, his voice calm, his gaze never leaving hers, "was the tool you mocked, the life you thought was beneath you. I pushed this broom through these same halls, humiliated, invisible, and you laughed. You spit on it. You spit on me." He set the broom back down carefully, almost reverently, as though it were worth more than diamonds. "But it was with this broom that I learned the dignity of work, the power of persistence, the value of building. That broom is worth more to me than your apology." Laura covered her mouth with her hands, a muffled sob breaking free. "And you know what hurts the most, Laura?" Ethan's voice softened, not with pity, but with finality. "Not that you left me, but that you never once believed in me. You couldn't see past what I was to what I could be, and that's why you're sitting there with nothing, while I stand here with everything." The words echoed in the boardroom like a gavel striking. Final. Unappealable. Laura's tears spilled freely now, dripping onto the resume that lay flat on the table, untouched. Her hands trembled as she tried to push it back toward him. "Please, Ethan, just one chance. Please, I'll do anything. Don't let me fall like this." He looked at the resume, then at her, and for a moment there was silence. Then with deliberate calm, Ethan slid the paper back across the table toward her, not with acceptance, but with rejection. "I don't build my future on people who gave up on me in the past." The room went still. The executives sat straighter, knowing the moment had crystallized into legend. Some nodded in approval, others simply held their breath. Laura's body shook. Her sobs grew louder, but they were no longer pleas. They were cries of a woman who finally understood the full weight of her choices. She had abandoned love for wealth, loyalty for luxury, and in the end, she had lost both. Ethan stepped back, buttoning his jacket again, preparing to leave the room. His eyes swept the table once more, landing briefly on the executives, then back on Laura. "You once told me I'd never be more than a poor dreamer," he said quietly. "You were right about one thing. I was a dreamer, but I never stayed poor." Her cry that followed wasn't just the sound of humiliation. It was the sound of a soul breaking. Ethan turned, his steps measured, his presence unshaken, and walked toward the door. He didn't slam it. He didn't even look back. He simply left her there, her resume, her tears, her broken pride scattered across the table. As the door clicked shut, the employees exhaled, the room releasing a tension that had held them captive. They would talk about this moment for years, The day the CEO faced his past and spoke justice with dignity, and Laura, left behind in the silence, buried her face in her hands, crying not just for what she lost, but for the realization of what she had thrown away. The boardroom door clicked shut behind Ethan, the sound sharp and final. Inside, Laura collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands, her resume crumpled under her elbows. The silence pressed down on her like a weight, broken only by the faint whispers of executives excusing themselves one by one. They didn't gloat, didn't console, because they knew this wasn't just an interview. It was history. Ethan walked calmly down the long corridor, the hum of the building around him steady, alive. Employees straightened as he passed, some nodding with respect, others murmuring with quiet awe. They had heard the fragments of what had just happened. Some had seen enough to understand. Word would spread, not as gossip, but as legend. In the lobby, Ethan paused. A young janitor knelt near the glass entrance, pushing a mop across the floor. His shoulders slumped, his movements weary. For a moment, Ethan saw himself, years ago, invisible, dismissed, mocked for the very work this young man now did. He stepped closer, and the janitor froze, startled by the CEO's sudden presence. Ethan bent slightly, his voice low but steady. "I used to stand where you are, with a broom in my hands. People looked right through me." The janitor blinked, unsure if he should speak. Ethan continued, his tone carrying quiet conviction. "Don't let them tell you this is all you'll ever be. You're more. One day you'll see it. Believe before anyone else does." The young man's eyes widened. Ethan gave him a faint smile, then walked on, his reflection tall in the polished glass doors as he stepped outside into the sunlight. Meanwhile, upstairs, Laura staggered out of the boardroom. Her makeup streaked, her shoulders hunched. She walked down the same hallway where she had once paraded with pride as Marcus's glittering wife. Now employees averted their eyes as she passed, not out of respect, but out of disdain. They knew her story. They knew who she was. She pressed the elevator button with trembling fingers, desperate to leave. As the doors opened, she caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, tear-stained, broken, a woman unrecognizable from the one who once laughed at Ethan's dreams. By the time she reached the lobby, Ethan was already gone. All that remained was the faint echo of his words in her mind. "I don't build my future on people who gave up on me in the past." She stumbled outside, clutching her resume like a torn flag, and sank onto the marble steps. The city bustled around her, cars honking, people laughing, life moving forward. But for Laura, time felt frozen. She buried her face in her hands and wept openly, her sobs swallowed by the city noise. She had left Ethan because he was poor. She had mocked him because he was a dreamer. She had chosen Marcus because he had wealth, and now she had lost them both. But worse than losing them, she had lost herself. Across the street, a giant billboard for coal industries glowed in the evening light. Ethan's company logo stretched proudly across it, bold and unshakable. Built on resilience. Laura looked up through her tears, the bright letters burning into her vision. She realized then that she wasn't just crying because Ethan had rejected her. She was crying because his success was a living reminder of her failure, a mirror reflecting every wrong choice she had made. Inside the building, employees still talked in hushed voices. They would tell the story to new hires, to interns, to anyone who doubted the CEO's strength. The tale of the woman who left him in the rain, only to return years later begging for a job, only to be turned away with words sharper than knives. And in his top-floor office, Ethan stood by the window, looking out over the city he had once walked through invisible. His reflection stared back at him, older, stronger, forged by fire. On his desk, the battered notebook lay open, its pages worn but alive. The same sketches that once made people laugh, now symbols of empire. He placed a hand on it, whispering softly, "We did it." Not to Laura, not to Marcus, not even to himself, but to the boy who once pushed a broom and whispered "one day" into the storm. And as the city lights flickered on below, Ethan Cole smiled faintly, not with arrogance, but with peace, because he knew he had built something that outlived pain, betrayal, and mockery. He had built something that could never be taken away. And Laura, sitting on the cold marble steps outside, wept until her tears ran dry, the weight of her choices pressing down harder than the night. The world moved forward. Ethan moved forward. Only she was left behind.